Your dog has been with you for 12 years. Through apartments, relationships, cities, versions of yourself you barely even recognize anymore. And one morning you wake up and something is just off. The food is untouched, and your dog is in the back of the closet or under the bed or in this one quiet corner of the yard that you almost never go to. And your dog won't come out. Now, you don't know it yet, but your dog does. And here's the thing. This is one of the most documented, most consistent, and honestly, least understood behaviors in the entire animal kingdom. And when scientists finally started asking why, not just what, but actually why, the answers went somewhere that nobody expected. Not into sadness, not into biology, into something so old that it actually predates sadness as a concept entirely. Okay, let's go. So first, establish what we're even talking about here. Because this isn't just dogs, and it isn't just pets. Elephants travel. Like when an elephant feels death approaching, something shifts in how they move. They leave the herd. They walk, sometimes for extraordinary distances, toward specific locations. And researchers have discovered that these locations often contain the remains of other elephants who made the exact same journey before them. These aren't random. They're not coincidental. Elephant graveyards are not some myth that Disney made up. They are documented, they are studied, and they are still not fully understood. Cats do it so consistently that it actually has a name in veterinary medicine, disappearing behavior. And I want you to think about what that means. A cat that has lived inside its entire life will, in those final days, find a way out, or it'll find the farthest, darkest interior space it possibly can, under floors, behind walls, basements, places that genuinely require effort to reach. Wild chimpanzees in Zambia, studied in the field, were observed climbing to elevated spots before death, positioning themselves above the group they'd been part of for decades and dying there, looking down, separate. Deer, foxes, wolves, birds. The behavior shows up across hundreds of species and dozens of studies, and every single time researchers try to explain it, they hit the same wall. It doesn't fit. Dying alone doesn't help the animal survive. It doesn't help its offspring survive. By normal evolutionary logic, this behavior should have just died out thousands of generations ago. Animals that waste energy retreating instead of resting safe with the group should be at a disadvantage. And yet, the behavior is still here. And it doesn't just persist, it intensifies. So either evolution kept making the same mistake for millions of years across completely unrelated species on multiple continents, or we're looking at this completely wrong. The predator theory, and where it breaks down. Okay, so the first explanation you'll find is called the predator theory. And I get why it's the default. It's clean, it's logical, it gets taught in introductory biology and repeated in basically every wildlife documentary you've ever seen. And it goes like this. A sick or dying animal is a liability. It moves slowly, it makes sounds, it smells different. Cortisol, ketones, the specific chemical signature of a body that is shutting down. And predators key into those signals. So a dying animal in the center of a herd puts everyone at risk. The dying animal removes itself. It's not retreating to die, it's protecting the group. And look, that theory works. It's backed by data. Sick animals do attract predators. The chemistry of dying is detectable at significant distance by a lot of predators. Group safety really is compromised by a sick individual. All of that is true. But here's where it falls apart. It cannot explain why this behavior happens in environments where there are no predators. Domestic pets in completely secured homes, zoo animals, sanctuary animals, where predation has been literally zero for their entire lives. The disappearing still happens. The isolation behavior still appears. It can't explain why it intensifies specifically near the very end, often within hours of death, when the actual benefit of isolating is basically nothing. And this is the part that really got researchers. It can't explain the direction. Because animals dying alone don't just move away from things, they move toward something specific. Okay, this is where it gets genuinely strange. A 2017 paper in Animal Cognition documented something that field researchers had informally noticed for decades, but nobody had ever formally studied. Animals approaching death, they don't just change their location, they change their orientation. They face specific directions. Deer and elk consistently found oriented toward open water, wolves toward elevated terrain with long sightlines, and elephants, like I mentioned, toward areas with previous elephant remains. And in dogs, domesticated indoor dogs, zero survival pressure. The retreating behavior is almost always toward enclosed, low-light spaces. And when you actually look at these spaces, they share something. Low sound, low light, limited sensory input from outside, a kind of sensory reduction down toward a baseline. And this is when researchers proposed something that has since gained serious traction in behavioral biology, something that kind of reframes everything. The isolation behavior might not be about predators at all. It might be about sensory management. Here's what that means. As a nervous system starts to fail, sensory processing gets dysregulated. Light becomes painful. Sound becomes disorienting. Smell stops giving information. It just creates confusion. A body that's shutting down loses the ability to filter input efficiently. So stimulation stops being useful. It becomes overwhelming. And the animal, with no language, no diagnosis, no conscious understanding of what is happening, responds the same way any living thing responds to overwhelming input. It moves away from the source. It finds dark. It finds quiet. It finds still. The dying animal isn't isolating for the group's protection. It's seeking the only sensory environment where its failing nervous system can find something that feels like peace. What this says about consciousness. Okay, and this is the part that nobody in the field really likes to talk about directly, because it opens a door that science has not been entirely comfortable walking through. The sensory management theory implies something about animal consciousness that mainstream biology spent most of the 20th century actively resisting. It implies that a dying animal has some awareness of its own state, not a diagnosis, not an understanding in the way that you or I would understand something, but a felt experience of something is different, something is wrong, something needs to change, and that the animal responds to that felt experience by making a choice, not a reflex, not a triggered behavior, a choice. Move toward quiet, move away from stimulation, find a place where the input matches what's left of the system receiving it. And researchers studying elephant death behavior noticed something even more specific. Elephants in those final stages would sometimes just stop, stand completely still for extended periods before continuing, and observers, scientists, people who have spent their careers trying not to anthropomorphize, described it as looking from the outside, like the animal was waiting, like it was listening for something, orienting. And then in 2022, a paper in Philosophical Transactions of the Royal Society made a claim that would have been professionally dangerous to make 30 years ago, that non-human animals have some form of subjective experience around the dying process, not identical to what humans experience, not necessarily involving anything like a concept of death, but something, a felt sense of transition that shapes behavior in coordinated, intentional ways. The animal retreating to die is not running a program. It is, by the current best understanding of animal consciousness research, doing something like making a choice about how it wants to feel in its final hours. The most documented case ever. There is one animal that illustrated this at a scale that made researchers genuinely sit up. In 2009, a chimpanzee named Dorothy died at a sanctuary in Cameroon. She'd lived there for years. She was known. She was loved. And when she died, the caregivers documented something they had never formally recorded before. The other chimpanzees gathered. They came to where Dorothy's body was being carried, and they watched. They didn't vocalize in the normal distress pattern. They just stood there. Several of them put their arms around each other. One young chimp, who had been particularly close to Dorothy, sat apart from the group and stared at her body for a long time. The photograph from that day became one of the most widely circulated wildlife images of the entire decade. But here's the thing. What happened before the death mattered as much. In those final days, Dorothy had pulled back from group activities, eaten less, started positioning herself at the edges of spaces rather than the center. She'd sought out the chimps she was closest to, and then gradually reduced even that contact. She was, by every behavioral measure, managing her own exit, adjusting her world in a way that moved towards something quieter. And the researchers found that every chimpanzee at that sanctuary who died in the years after showed variations of the same pattern, not identical, individual, but the same direction, toward edges, less stimulation, a gradual and unmistakable narrowing of the sensory world. And the part I cannot stop thinking about. Okay, here's where this goes somewhere I genuinely was not prepared for when I first read about it. The behavior we've been describing this whole time, the retreat, the seeking of quiet, the reduction of input, the movement toward the simplest, most familiar sensory environments, it's not unique to animals facing death. Humans do this. Not always, not everyone, but it shows up in end-of-life research across cultures, across languages, across belief systems that have completely different ideas about what death is and what comes after. People in the final stages of terminal illness, they frequently say they want fewer visitors, not more. They want quieter rooms, familiar objects, familiar sounds, simplified, and then at the very end, a particular kind of stillness. The hospice literature is consistent on this. The world gets smaller, deliberately, not because of giving up, but because of something that looks from the outside like preparation, which means the behavior your dog shows in those final hours, finding the dark corner, the quiet space, the place with the least stimulation, is not that different from what humans do when they're given the option. It is not absence. It is not abandonment. It is not your dog moving away from you. It is your dog doing, with the same biological inheritance that every living thing carries, the thing that every living nervous system apparently tends toward at the end. Finding the frequency that matches the quieting signal, going somewhere that feels right. and back to where we started. So, your dog in the back of the closet, your cat in the basement, the elephant walking towards something familiar on the horizon. What you're witnessing when you see that is not an animal retreating from life. It is an animal carrying millions of years of biological wisdom in its nervous system, finding the environment that fits what it is becoming. It is, by the best science we currently have, a choice made by a consciousness that is not identical to yours, but is not as different as we spent a very long time pretending it was. The dark corner is not where your dog went to be alone. It's where your dog went to be at peace. And now you know.